Spring 2021. The prospects for this upcoming season largely depend on how you thought last season went. Winter of 2021 was probably one of the biggest single seasons we've had in a number of years, coming fresh off of 2020 with more delayed anime than I can mention. With that came a number of positives, as well as some negatives. On the positive side, plenty of new anime, all at once. I actually made it a mission to try and keep up with more than just a small handful of shows this past season, and all told, I think I did pretty well. Sure, I dropped half of what I've started with, but considering I started with 14 shows, keeping up with 7 is a far cry from the 2 to 4 that I'm usually able to handle. Not to mention, of course, that several of the shows I dropped, I didn't necessarily drop because they were bad. Wonder Egg Priority is, narratively, one of the best anime of this past season, but because its narrative and subtexts are so dense, I spent so much time during those initial episodes just reorienting myself every week within its narrative, I had to put it on hold until I could set the pace for my watching after the show had finished. I stopped watching Non-Non-Biyori, not because I hate the season, but because I decided to save it until there was a season later this year where I didn't have another comfy show like Laid Back Camp to relax with. And Log Horizon got shelved because, well, it hit the ground running with its narrative so hard that as someone who honestly forgot everything that happened in the previous 2 seasons that finished 5 years ago, I couldn't follow the detailed politics of the characters anymore, so that whole franchise just needs a rewatch for me, to be honest. Really, no one could ever possibly say that last season we were not spoiled for options on what we could watch, but the negative is that there was almost too much. Take Dr. Stone, for example. During its initial run back in 2019, it was a definite highlight of its season. A rocky start, perhaps, but it was a series that was regularly talked about and enjoyed by much of the community. In contrast, while the show has still retained a decent audience and those who watched it still sing its praises highly, I keep feeling like the amount of people who have been talking about it are overwhelmingly drowned out by everything else that's airing. If it wasn't on my list of things to watch, I probably would have forgotten about it entirely after everything else in my social timelines. Cells at Work had almost the same problem, not helped by the fact that both its second season and its spin-off, Cells at Work Black, were aired not just in the same season, but on the same day. Perhaps just too much of a good thing. So by comparison, this upcoming season is certainly lacking in titles, but honestly, I'm considering it a good thing considering. It gives us time to catch up with what we missed from last season while giving us a few new, good shows to keep us interested. At least I hope. It's hard to tell before these shows actually start airing. So today, we are looking at the upcoming shows for the Spring 2021 season, and specifically, what I am personally looking forward to. Let's take a look at some sequels. First, the obvious. Slime. I suppose no, I actually need to specify because there's a new show coming out with slime in the title, but we'll get to that and just assume that everyone knows when I say we're talking about slime as a title, we are of course referring to That Time I Was Reincarnated as a Slime. Now, we did start by calling this series a sequel, but that's not actually true. Slime Season 2, which has been airing for the last 3 months, is going on a seasonal hiatus until summer. What we are getting in the meantime is not a sequel, but a side story spin-off called The Slime Diaries. Basically, the existing series has done a massive amount of world building, from the various foreign nations to Rimuru's own Tempest Nation. So what's the point of having this extremely developed world if you can't have some fun in it? Depending on how comedic it ends up being, I'd like to compare it favorably to the Fumofu series of Full Metal Panic. It's a tough comparison though, since Fumofu is an amazing series in its own right and still one of my favorite comedy anime of all time, so those are some big shoes to fill. But that is certainly the vibe that I'm getting here. In the end, your enjoyment will largely depend on how much you enjoy Slime as a series already, and as well if you enjoy the style of humor that they bring to the table. Personally, I'm looking forward to it. I've always liked calmer shows, and since Slime as a franchise has been a favorite of mine since it started airing, I am excited to see where this goes. Next is the questionable entry, Megalobox Season 2 Nomad. I say questionable because Megalobox has an interesting history now. If you were around when Season 1 aired, you might remember that many people, myself included, spoke highly of the series. The stylization was on point, the music was one of the best of that year, and the whole fact that this was just a modern take on Ashita no Joe was, for me, a personal major high point. But also, the popularity of that show tanked rather quickly, and I'm not entirely sure why. I feel like I need to spend time actually digging into that, but there was massive amounts of hype for that show, both when it first came out and when it started airing, but I feel like that hype quickly fizzled out even before the show finished airing. I can't even tell you why I didn't finish watching it at the time. I just didn't feel compelled to continue. Perhaps that was a common feeling among some of its initial view base. Perhaps it's just not my kind of show, despite my initial hype, but we'll see. Next, a series I feel like I'm constantly in the minority for supporting on a regular basis, the Fruits Basket readaptation is getting its third and final season, which, if I'm remembering the manga correctly, though it's been like a decade since I read it, should be enough to wrap everything up. The whole existence of this readaptation has been a miracle from the get-go, so the fact that it's been pushed along to this point, that we might actually reach the end of the manga, is a godsend. The original Fruits Basket manga ended back in 2006, and since usually anime is more often than not treated as promotional work for the source material, the idea that they were trying to promote a 10-year-old manga just kind of seemed out of the question, but it happened, and it's freaking good. I suppose you could say that there was some cross-promotion intended for the Fruba sequel manga, but even that sequel was apparently wrapped up before the first season of this adaptation aired. So I'm not sure what kind of monkey paw curse someone took on to make this adaptation a reality, but I am eternally thankful nonetheless. And lastly, on the sequel front, Zombieland Saga Revenge. Will the sequel live up to the original? Will the girls be able to save the region of Saga? Will the legendary Yatta-Tachi grace us with her singing voice? That last one I'm actually totally serious about. Because, by the way, one of the greatest jokes of the original was that they got the original voice of Sailor Moon herself to be an idol. And all she does is moan and groan the entire time. It's honestly hilarious. Zombieland is one of those anime that I didn't expect to end up enjoying as much as I did, and then by the end of it, it was one of my favorites for that year. Honestly stoked that it's getting a sequel. Hopefully, that's all it needs for its story, and if not, I hope then that we get a third season, because I'm just too invested in these characters to be left on another cliffhanger. I can't take much of that kind of thing anymore. So with that initial excitement talked about, let's move on to the new shit. Starting with potentially the most awesome and equally the most depressing entry of today, Shaman King 2021. Now, I'm not as familiar with Shaman King as I probably should be and absolutely want to be. It was a Shonen Jump manga that was printed between 1998 and 2004. Despite its ending, however, it has remained even 17 years later in circulation in Japan, retaining its popularity. The show, very similar to Fruits Basket, actually had an original anime adaptation back in 2001 that lasted for 64 episodes, which is impressive enough until we remember that said adaptation ended before the manga did, which is where this new adaptation comes in. It is being produced by Studio Bridge, a spin-off of Sunrise that some might remember as one of the 4 studios in charge of the fairy tale anime during its run alongside A1, After Statelight, and just before Cloverworks at the end. So it's got a popular source material, a decent studio with shonen chops developing it. So why did I call it depressing? Because it's a Netflix jail. It's a shonen in Netflix jail, which is even more depressing than usual, because if Netflix decides to do the same thing that they do with like other anime and hold off on North American releases until the show is done and the dub is completed, then we might not actually be looking at watching Shaman King this season. And we might have to wait, what, 2 years from now? Depending on how long this adaptation plans to run and whether or not they release in batches. Like, this could be the next 100 plus episode shonen series, considering how dense the source is. But who knows what they got planned. Either way, it's on Netflix, and if they want to release it weekly or in chunks, great. If I can watch it, I'll likely be extremely satisfied. But at the moment, that's a big if. Speaking of fairy tale, though, let's talk about Eden Zero. Now, I know nothing about Eden Zero, except, like, I look at the artwork, and I know that it's from the same mangaka of Fairy Tail, so I wouldn't be surprised if the entire premise is just fairy tale in space. Though I'm willing to bet that that description is a massive oversimplification, and I'm sure angry Fairy Tail and or Eden Zero manga fans are already correcting me in the comments. Honestly though, that description is enough to get my interest piqued. A lot of why I never made it past like 50 episodes of Fairy Tail, despite it being a fairly good series, was that there was just so much of it that felt more of a a refinement of what came before and less of something entirely new. So even if you just take that and dump it into space, the setting plays a massive role in making this new series stand out. And I feel like space and shonen is a combination we haven't seen enough to be bored with yet. Astro Lost in Space was a nice excursion a number of years back, and no, I do not count Dragon Ball Z as a space shonen, though that setting is certainly included in there. So I'm intrigued to see what ends up coming out of Eden Zero. Oh wait, no I'm not, because again, it's also a Netflix gem. Is this what the future is like? Do we just have to get used to the streaming world of Sony's Crunchymation, Netflix's Prison for the Good, and Amazon, wait, what's that anime thing? Ah, just ship it, I don't care, kind of attitude. So I've been killing slimes for 300 years and maxed out my level is the next series we're talking about. It's the reason why I now need to clarify what slime show I'm talking about, because both of these shows involve characters who reincarnate into a fantasy world and become extremely OP characters. This time though, instead of becoming a slime, our protagonist, Azusa, kills them for a living. But since its listed genre is comedy, that probably saves Rimuru for having to worry for his existence. Not that I would actually worry about who would win in a matchup between these two characters, especially if you're caught up on slime. I've heard a variety of good things about the original light novel, and there's enough material in here to maintain a possible 2-cour series, though its actual episode length hasn't been mentioned yet at time of writing. So what I'm hoping out of this one is a nice, chill, upbeat fantasy series, which hopefully won't overlap too much with the slime spin-off that's already fighting for that slot in my watch schedule, but we'll have to see. And so, that is it. That is literally all the anime that I am currently excited for, which means that's obviously the only anime that's going to be worth watching, right? Of course it is. But if it's not, well, I'm sure there'll be some people that decide that they want to bully me in the comments, as is their way. I do usually miss something every season anyways, and it's kind of nice when I get blown out of the water with something I wasn't expecting. Will that happen this time, though? We'll have to see. As usual, there will be streaming links down in the description for many of these shows, as long as they have them. The Netflix ones, obviously not, but I'll do my best with the rest. And of course, while a lot of you are going to do it anyways, let me know down in the comments what you guys are excited for, and if I have a spare moment after making my own list and my never-ending catch-up from previous seasons, I'll definitely be checking out to see if there's anything else worth adding. Lastly, a very special thank you to my patrons who not only continue to support my work in general, but allow me to continue to do what I do. I love and appreciate you all. Specifically, though, I want to give particular shoutouts to patrons Wago221, Hector Montemayor, Rune Jacobson, Ryfen Bonaparte, and City Yamako for being especially awesome. You guys are great. And until next time, ladies, gentlemen, and others, watch more anime and stay frosty.